three measurements of core inflation have inflation almost on target already. They're in the 1.6 to 1.8 range. So we're getting near the target. The only reason that CPI is below that is because of a one-time drop in fuel prices and some peculiarities in the costs of accommodation because of the collapse of the hotel sector. But other than that, inflation is basically at target. So why are you continuing to print money and buy government bonds when we're on target on inflation?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, as I think you know, the target is total CPI inflation. That's what actually matters to Canadians and what they buy, and it is 0.7 in October. And yes, as the oil price shock falls out of the year over year, we would expect inflation to come up gradually. But there is a tremendous amount of excess capacity, unused capacity in the economy. More than 600,000 Canadians have not got their jobs back. And our view is that we're in a very slow phase of recovery. We started out through the reopening phase with actually a very impressive bounce back in economic activity. That reopening phase is now open. We're into a slower, choppier, bumpery, tougher recuperation phase, where we still have a lot of unemployment. Just to put that 600,000 in perspective, at the worst part of the 08-09 financial crisis in Canada, we lost about 430,000 jobs. We still have more than that to get back. That's putting a lot of downward pressure on inflation. And so what we're doing is we're leaning against that downward pressure to try to keep inflation from falling and, in fact, nudge it back up towards the target.
But that being said, you're quite right. The economy is much worse here, both in absolute and in relative terms to our competitors than it was into 2008. We are the second worst in terms of unemployment in the G7 right now. Not the case back then. But it is possible for inflation and high unemployment to coexist. In fact, we had something called stagflation in the 70s and 80s. And it's incredible that we have core inflation almost at target, even with exceptionally high unemployment, which suggests that you cannot necessarily expect that inflation is going to stay low until unemployment comes down. So what makes you so sure that we will not experience the same kind of bout of stagflation that happened back in the late 70s and early 80s, when governments were pursuing the exact same policies as now, big deficits financed by printing at central banks?
Our view is, I agree with you. There are both, there are important supply elements to this shock as well as demand, and to the effect that supply is constrained, and so that adds cost pressure. That will counterbalance some of the downward pressure coming from lack of demand. And we are seeing that in some parts of the economy where we've seen increases in demand or particularly severe supply constraints. But certainly what we've seen so far and what we expect to continue, we think that the disinflationary aspects outweigh those cost push elements. Okay. So we think the net effect is negative. Now, I just
ask one last question, Mr. Chair.
We could be, it may not be that we're entirely right. And that's one of the beauties of an inflation target is the inflation, our goal is the inflation target, and that keeps us grounded. That is what we're focusing on. If it turns out that we're wrong and there's more inflationary pressure than we expect, we will adjust, and we have the tools to adjust.
So can you commit to this committee that you will not abandon the current inflation target? Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both.